slides here in a second. I'm going to share my slides here in just a second. I like to have just a little bit of text to work off of as we go through. So hopefully that'll go smoothly. It's my first time sharing slides on a new computer, so we know how that can go. Right. It's already asking me to share my system preferences. See, this is why it's always a process. So yeah, thank you for bearing with me for just a minute. All right, so let's try that again. Sharing my screen. All right. All right. All right. If I could see some a thumb up or two if the slide a blue slide saying overcoming polarization is visible.
Yep, it's visible.
Awesome, awesome, great. Well, I'm gonna keep this up for a while, which is gonna leave me unable to see notes in the chat. Anna and Antoine, I know we'll be keeping an eye on that. But also, I just want to empower folks to come off mute and inject questions and comments. We've got an intimate group, and that's a great that's a great setting for some freer give and take rather than just like content delivery. So just want to invite and empower everyone to chime in with questions, comments, relevant anecdotes, anything of that nature that comes up for you as we go. All right. So just want to lay out an agenda for where I want to go tonight. Starting off with just level setting on why we're here and what we're doing. Then go into like examples of effective action that local coalitions have taken to either mitigate and respond to or prevent acts of identity targeted violence. I want to draw some lessons from those and go into some dynamics and language that are sort of warning signs and justification mechanisms for the kind of violence that we're talking about. Then we're going to have a couple of breakout rooms with some discussion prompts, and then come back together. And the reason I've been doing this work since 2016 of helping local groups to become preventers of identity targeted violence is because of what I've seen. I saw pretty up close January 6th. I lived on Capitol Hill at the time. I'm close friends with people in Charlottesville, Virginia. And I've also worked with coalitions in places like Jacksonville, Florida, Columbus, Ohio, and Atlanta, as well as Atlanta, where people are scared and also determined to make sure that any sort of racist or religiously targeted or gender or sexual identity targeted violence or violence targeted on the basis of perceived immigration status or political affiliation, that these things are prevented when preventable and responded to effectively when the unfortunate and the unacceptable does happen. I've seen it. I've seen leaders like y'all make a big difference and come together when times get really, really, really hard. And conversations like what we're going to have tonight are the beginning of a process that is very empowering, that really helps keep us all safe. Oh, and when I say identity targeted violence, I mean the person or group that is targeted is intentionally targeted based on one of those characteristics or more of those characteristics that I just named. It's different from random violence. It's different from intimate partner violence, economic violence, or things like that. I think hate crimes is a term that is pretty apt for the type of violence that I'll be talking about tonight. So I've had the honor of working with diverse local coalitions in places that were targeted by far-right violence. Most notably, Charlottesville, Virginia. I think everybody still remembers pretty clearly what happened in August of 2017 there when a so-called Unite the Right rally came to the city and uh, with tiki torches and surrounded synagogues chanting "Jews will not replace us," and attacked counter demonstrators, culminating in the killing of a young woman named Heather Heyer. A couple of friends of mine are in this photo here. There was a group called Charlottesville Clergy Collective that for years had been building power as a multi-faith, multiracial organization, meeting regularly, forging statements of common values, and just building those connective tissues of relationships and trust building, the kind of tables that really should exist amongst diverse faith communities and people who are comfortable working in faith communities who may not themselves be people of faith should be doing on an ongoing basis. And because the Charlottesville Clergy Collective had been building relationships with each other for so long, they felt safe or safe enough to gather publicly in the face of the Unite the Right rally. And they were Jewish and Christian and Muslim and secular folks who went out to the place where they knew that the Unite the Right rally on the quad was going to have their rallying point, and simply offered a counter presence. You can see the religious garb here, a faithful presence, a moral presence, saying that we reject this, that the diverse community of Charlottesville does not stand for this, and we do not cede the ground. And they were attacked. They were a group, a white supremacist group called Identity Europa, attacked them, and anti-fascists actually came to their aid. And one of my friends in this photo, Seth, he's the tall man in the white robe and the red stole, said that anti-fascists saved his life that day. But these folks in this picture were nonviolent. And their image, this image here from various angles, went out around the entire world. And I've heard from folks in other communities that seeing someone stand up to far right violence was an incredibly empowering thing. And when I spoke to the Charlottesville Clergy Collective folks the day before the attack, the reason they had called me in was to provide some media training, just for interview preparation, getting their message down, and just making sure that they were camera ready. That was a lot of the work that I did back then. And one thing that really struck me about them is how well prepared they were for what they were about to face. They knew that it was going to be violent. And so they exchanged advice with each other, like make sure that our signs aren't on sticks because the protesters will take the sticks and beat us. They were extraordinarily well prepared, and because of that preparation, they survived, and they put out a moral witness that resonates to this day. Some former colleagues of mine in an organization called Faith and Public Life in Ohio organized an event of a different nature, and certainly a less world famous moment that was also really inspiring and really peace building a few years ago. I think this was in 2019. There was a Christian nationalist YouTuber in Ohio who announced to his audience that they were going to picket a mosque in the Cincinnati area at the end of Friday prayers. at the end of Friday prayers on Eid, and they were going to do this no matter what. And a friend of mine, and a friend and colleague of mine, who monitors the far right, saw that this was planned, and he reached out to the mosque and made sure that the folks at the mosque were aware of the threat, and they actually had not been aware of it to that point. So they were monitoring the Christian nationalist, anti-Islamophobic uh, movement online. And so they said, "What do you need?" Or my friend Dan, who was an organizer, asked the imam, what do you need? What would help you make you feel safe?" And he just wanted the imam wanted his congregation to not have to deal with the sight of the picketing and the hateful signs, and to hear the hateful language that was going to be coming. So Dan organized a group to put up what they call a barrier of love, and it was Christian, Jewish, and Muslim folks who chose to take part, despite being directly targeted, surrounded the mosque uh, physically, so to block the visual of the hateful anti-Muslim signs from the Christian nationalist protesters. And reporters came because the media does thrive on conflict, and the Christian nationalists had notified the media um, of their impending action. But because the local community um, activated and reached out to the folks who were targeted and asked what they needed, there was a counter mobilization that prevented violence, and also was a moving show of solidarity. So, um, Charlottesville and Cincinnati, where these happened, there were some common threads from the groups involved that enabled them to mobilize a powerful presence. One is they were monitoring on an ongoing basis activities of the far right, both at the local level and nationally online. It's hard work to do, but having an ear to the ground really made all the difference between being able to show up and not. So monitoring the threat environment was step one. Uh, Step 1A is networking on an ongoing basis, being in relationship across communities, across racial and religious lines, meeting just for the sake of uh, having group breakfasts together, having discussion groups together, going to rallies together, just having a standing coalition. This kind of every month, week in, week out type of relationship building was the basis for being able to activate and to show up at a moment of emergency. So if you're already doing that work of being at tables, of setting tables, going to events, organizing events, you are doing the work right now that will enable and empower you to be a violence preventer in the months ahead. Being in really regular contact is a key part of that. Checking in with folks on a sustained, couple times a month basis, just keeping the contacts warm. Which might seem like just networking 101 or organizing 101. It really is what makes the difference between being able to mount something and not. And and they had an act they took action planning once they picked up the threat, and they delegated roles, and they had like a literal old school phone tree, like decided who calls whom in what order to activate people to show up. So the roles, one is a convener, two is a media contact, three and three. Hold on, I'm forgetting the third. Sorry, there's the convener, then the media contact. Oh yeah, and the event organizer. So and so they had roles and they had contact plans, and they also had come together on message, deciding what they wanted to say before the event. That is just so key. Like knowing what you want the headline or the social media post or the media or the television hit to actually say, and then saying that when you have the opportunity to do so publicly is key. And common threads of the action. They made a visible public presence, and they made a show specifically of diversity that includes both targeted and non-targeted groups. If it was if it was only um, if it was only non-targeted people showing up on behalf of the targeted people, that's problematic in one way. If it is only the targeted people from the targeted group showing up to defend themselves, that's a failure of solidarity in another way. So having the diversity was really key, and the public presence, they went to the point of attack. They showed up at the mosque that was being picketed. They showed up at the public square that was being attacked, and that was that kind of decision. Like, do you put yourself in harm's way or not? Is a case by case local decision. In these cases, the choice to show up at those places did make all of the difference. Though, of course, that is not always the safe, not always the safe or ideal thing to do. But the point is that they chose a place that was visible, that where there would be no missing what they're going to do. And they also modeled nonviolent norms. I think in the picture you saw the people holding hands and linking arms and making a show of religious garb that conveyed peace, like the stole with more rainbow type of colors on it. If people can look at it and can look at you and say, okay, that is a diverse group, and that is a group that is gathering nonviolently. That's a message that is more important than any eloquent talking point you could say. So the visual presence, the visual symbolism of the diversity, and the visual embodying of nonviolence, all were very key. And these are the kinds of things that are important to do going forward, regardless of what your local context is, and regardless of the threat environment, regardless of the moment. So I'm going to take a sip of water here real quick. Does anyone have any questions, comments? Does this bring up any thoughts that anyone would like to share with the group?
Out of curiosity, in these places, how often do they have someone who is employed to be the organizer to make these kind of connections, just in general, or how much of it is volunteer based?
In Cincinnati, there was a paid person. That was my colleague. His name is Dan. And in Charlottesville, it was all volunteer led. I mean, it really does. And drawing on other states and communities, it really does help to have somebody whose job it is to do the organizing work. It is doable without that. But I'm glad you asked because having a dedicated staffer for that is certainly a value add and a thing to as you're trying to do development, a point to make to people you're trying to raise resources from. Others? All right. So identity targeted violence, where you go from, where there is a, usually it's a far right group, targeting people on the basis of their race, their religion, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, the immigration or their immigration status, or political affiliation. These, this is a violence type that goes all the way back in human history, across eras, continents, differently structured societies. We see over and over again that there are patterns of language and societal dynamics that emerge time and time again in advance of an incident of large scale identity targeted violence. Every single time we see the same patterns coming up. And broadly speaking, there are three dynamics that precede active identity targeted violence, and then specific types of language that fuel those. So I want to just drill down on what those are for a minute, because it can help us be effective monitors of our threat environments locally and nationally. So three core dynamics are these. One is the sharpening of the us-them divide. In order for identity targeted violence to work, there has to be a clear us and a clear us and a clear them, and a clear demarcation in between. And those harden very, very much in the run up to violence. Widening of empathy gaps is another. People often think of violence or authoritarianism as a symptom of a lack of empathy. That's actually not quite the case, though. What is really going on is an empathy gap, where people have really intense empathic concern and connection with the us, with the in-group, and very dramatically lowered empathic concern and affiliation with the out-groups. So it's rather than a cold lack of humanity, it is sort of a hoarding of that empathic feeling toward the in-group and completely taking it away from the out-group. So the empathy gap, the us-them divides, the widening empathy gaps, and then the manipulation and changing of norms, making room for violence in our moral systems. It's definitely not the case that on one day you get up and your society is at peace, and then the next day you get up and somebody tells you to go commit an act of violence and you do it. These dynamics take place over time, and they're fueled by language and specific types of language. And these
Dan,
are
I'm following the chat, and we have a
oh yeah.
question in the chat. If you wouldn't mind answering that before moving on, just because it was specific.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Oh, I can see the chat now. It says, Anna, this is really helpful. Oh, go ahead. Thanks.
So we have, can you say more about smaller town or rural settings where tactics of intimidation may look different?
Yes. One thing I've seen in small towns in North Florida was at polling places, having folks drive around them in circles while wielding long guns like AR-15s. So people with MAGA stickers on their trucks, literally with MAGA stickers on their trucks, sort of going back and forth and around the block for polling places in small majority Black towns. That's one thing that I've seen. The only one that really comes to mind. But knowing how small town and rural far right groups activate, they have Facebook groups often that are private. But also a lot of things, you'll see a lot of these speech patterns that I'll be going into right out in the open on the local Facebook groups, like neighborhood groups, like I live in Miriam Park, St. Paul, like the Miriam Park Facebook group. Rural areas I know use those heavily as well. I wish I could speak in more depth about it, but that's all that I know of that comes to mind. I hope that's helpful. Do you have any follow-up questions or comments on that? Okay.
Sorry, that was my question. This is Anna Tendig-Flores. I'm with the Presbytery of the Twin Cities area, and I'm just asking because I know that we've had some of our congregations experience a good deal of pushback around like having pride gatherings in their smaller town or something like that. So just trying to and because I work across the entire area of our presbytery or our local synod area, just trying to get a sense of how these dynamics play out in different settings and whether you think there's any different strategies or tools that might apply to some settings versus others.
Yeah, I mean, I think toward that specific example of pride gatherings in small towns, that's an example of there's a moment that you could anticipate being a target, a flashpoint. So, you know, if there's going to be a pride parade or like a pride float in a town parade that's like a larger, you know, 4th of July type thing, for instance, you know, being aware of that and having people show up and just like more folks on the float and do it in a way that's solidarity, like those linking of those arms, those holding of those hands is a simple and worthwhile thing to do. Because in order to make a group, you know, vulnerable, making them isolated is a key part of that. And there really is safety in numbers, both in the metaphysical level and in the, you know, on the very practical level. So I think just showing numbers and having those numbers modeling diversity to the extent possible and nonviolence.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Good, good. I'm glad. And another thing to be aware of on that is, and I alluded to this earlier with the voting example, is it is more common to see firearms in the small town and rural context, including long guns. So making sure that everybody is prepared for that ahead of time is really, really important. It's so much like the reaction that goes on inside of you, just like neurologically, when you see a gun that you're expecting to see versus seeing a gun that you're not expecting to see, are dramatically different. They're entirely different experiences. So that's something that I would definitely do if you were going to carry forward an action, just to make sure that that's a key part of the prep, is anticipating the sight of long guns. All right. So the dangerous speech. So there's the us them divides, the empathy gaps, and the changing of the norms. Those are the broad dynamics, the subterranean thing that's going on as societies or groups within societies move toward violence. The language, what's going to show up above the surface. There's 6 types of dangerous speech that emerge over and over across continents and eras and social structures. Dehumanization, number 1. And I think this one is pretty well known. I've done a lot of trainings, and everyone always has examples of dehumanization that come up right away. When the targeted group is likened to being subhuman, to being vermin, being dangerous animals, wild animals, we see this over and over. And you certainly know it when you see it. The word rat, the word snake, the word ape, wolves, things like that. Usually they're either disease-carrying animals or animals that attack humans. So that's easy to spot. You know it when you see it for sure. 2 others that are a little more subtle are collective guilt and collective threat. Collective guilt is when a group as a whole is held responsible for the actions of a person within that group. Collective threat is when the group is portrayed corporately as a threat. So if a person who is a Green Bay Packers fan punches you at a football game, Packers fans punch you at a football game, and Packers fans are dangerous. That's how collective guilt and collective threat work. And I hope I didn't offend any Packers fans here. All right. So those are the forms of dangerous speech that focus on them. Then there's the forms of dangerous speech that focus on us, and these are subtler, and these are harder to spot, and they're also really important. One is what we call destruction of alternatives. These are patterns of speech that send the message that we have no choice but to act violently toward them. We've established their subhumanity, and we have established their guilt and their threat. We still need to, or when that happens, the case still needs to be made why violence, as opposed to just political repression or ignoring or moving away from it. There has to be a compelling reason that violence itself is necessary. And you'll see phrases like, we have no choice, or I wish we didn't have to, but constructions like that are a warning sign. Destructive alternatives. Virtue talk is, in my opinion, the subtlest of them all. Virtue talk refers to when virtues that are associated with violence are lifted up and valorized within society. And virtues associated with violence are toughness and ruthlessness. Those two in particular. And they're also, the other half of virtue talk is the marginalization of virtues that are associated with peace. So such things as mercy, tolerance, and compassion. Those can be portrayed as naive. Those can be portrayed as weak. Those could even be portrayed as disloyal to the group. So I mean, in general, I'm always on the lookout for all of these things everywhere I go. Like once you learn it, it kind of stays with you. But I see a lot of toughness is a really big one. And you notice I didn't say courage. Courage is a virtue that can be associated with both violence and with peace. And I always advise folks to claim courage rather than to cede it away to people who are more violently inclined. All right, so destruction of alternatives, virtue talk, and then lastly is future bias. These are patterns of speech that either state or clearly imply that there's a brighter future that will come if we commit this act of violence. The Holocaust actually was supposed to bring in what they called the 1,000-year Reich, a time of idyllic Aryan dominance. And you see this in certain other groups as well. It's common. So dangerous speech puts guilt and threat on a group, says we have no choice but to take that group out, and then gets people to the place where they can do it by playing up the things that will help them do it, and marginalizing things that would that trigger people to say, no, I don't want to do that. So to take it back to the football example, I'll just tell you a quick illustrative story from my personal life. One time I went to a Washington, D.C. football game. I lived the Commanders with some family members, and my brother got into a small violent altercation after the game with a fan for the other team, the Bills. And the way we told that story to our family was after the game, people had been drinking a little bit. A Bills fan shoved Eric and accidentally knocked down Reagan, and we got to shoving, and people threw some swings. Nobody was harmed, and nobody went to jail. That was the story that we recounted to our family when we came home. But you know, that is, violence is bad. That is the type of, that is containable, incidental violence. If I were to describe that in a dangerous way, I would say that Bills fans are Neanderthals, or Bills. They call themselves Bills Mafia. Like Bills Mafia are Neanderthals. Bills Mafia started a fight with me and Eric after the game. Bills Mafia is aggressive, and we must protect this house. We must use force if necessary. There's no other way to deal with Bills Mafia. If we don't take them out, they're going to take over. And once we put them in their place, the stadium will be safe for kids again. Like that's so much more like mobilizing and compelling and scary than two guys got to swinging after a game. The patterns of speech are, other than the dehumanization, they can be pretty subtle. So that's why we take the time to like really spell them out so that you can be monitoring for them. So I want to go a little bit into what we can do linguistically and as public advocates against to counteract these. But in the broadest of strokes, we want to provide a lighthouse rather than a fire alarm. We want to give people something to focus on and direction and direction on where to go and where to avoid in what we say publicly. What does that look like? We want to make sure that everything we would say at an event, like the barrier of love, for instance. Imagine that there's, we're putting a ring around a mosque that is being picketed by Islamophobes, and the media will come to that, and people will be Instagram living it, streaming it on Facebook, and things of that nature. We're going to be speaking. The things that we say should help build up a sense of agency. Saying messages that state that give people the feeling that acting can make a difference. It's like, show up with us. That is the type of message that gives people a sense of effectuality, a sense of agency, that doing something other than passively sitting back is worth doing. Want to make sure that our language is specific. When we're talking about an act of violence, we want to be very clear about who is committing it and who is being targeted by it in a way that doesn't obscure the nature of it and doesn't impute guilt more widely than is merited. We really have to practice what we preach when it comes to avoiding collective blame and collective guilt. Giving audiences concrete steps to take is key. It's kind of like, in a one-on-one, you always want to walk away with next steps, or if you're speaking in front of a room, you always want to have a call to action. Same thing with any communication that's a response to violence. You want to affirm nonviolent norms and democratic values, emphasize collectivity, emphasize peace, also emphasize determination and courage and strength. We want to make sure that people know that banding together works and that we can keep ourselves safe without resorting to violence. And we want to make sure that we reach diverse audiences. So that means inclusive language, gender inclusive, racially inclusive. I've seen a lot of groups that have white folks in decision making and spokespeople roles default to a white we, where it is white folks talking on behalf of BIPOC folks to the broader community, and that's not okay. We want to make sure that our spokespeople are reflective of our diversity and that we are inclusive in our language. And I know that folks in this space buy into that already, and I'm probably stating something that you already deeply believe, but it's just so important that I would be remiss to not reinforce how important that work that you already do is. And don'ts. There are things that we really need to avoid in the way that we communicate when we're responding to or trying to prevent violence. We want to avoid feeding into defeatist feelings. We want to avoid discussing violence without condemning it. Even if you're describing somebody else's violence, adding the statement at the end, yes, they resorted to violence here today, and that is never okay in our society. Don't attribute actions to entire identity groups, even if that's like a political group that is ultimately the home of the violence. We want to make sure that specific people who are acting violently are the specific people that we hold accountable. That's why when I describing what happened in Charlottesville, I was sure to mention that it was a group called Identity Europa that did it, rather than saying the alt-right or the MAGA guys. We want to people who resort to violence for political purposes want to create the impression that there are a ton of them and that it is an entire social movement squashing a smaller group. When if you look at it up close, it's a small subset of a larger group pushing across boundaries and trying to bring everybody along with them. We want to make sure that we avoid helping them do that work. And that's why specificity is important. We want to make sure that we also avoid engaging in speculation and avoid activating fear and anxiety. That's where that lighthouse comes in. We want to, as a rule of thumb, we want to give people a direction to move and a message on how to that going there will keep people safe. Fear is a fear is a paralyzing emotion for some people, and anxiety brings about indecision, which stalls and costs us precious time. So before we go into I have some prompts for breakout rooms. I wanted to just stop the share for a minute and see folks' faces and see what this is bringing up. Questions, comments, anything at all that's coming to your mind. I'd love to hear from more folks. I'm a former teacher. I believe in letting silence linger when I'm trying to draw out thoughts from folks. Khan, as a fellow St. Paulite, I invite you if you have any questions and any thoughts to add as a neighbor in my own community, or anybody else who wants to chime in. All right. Well, I have. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I just was trying to give space for others. But I just wanted to say I really appreciated your comments about language that might be less helpful, including the pieces around not lumping people together and things like that. I think it can be something I've noticed is that in a desire to seem like we know how challenging things are, we can sort of resort to a form of you use the word defeatism, I think, in your piece, but sort of like knowing cynicism about how things are or might be in the future. And you know, in some like in my generational cohort, like sometimes it's like, well, we know we're living in the, you know, in kind of like the fall of this or the fall of that or whatever. And just to name that, I'm hearing you sort of say like that sort of thing, especially around violence and polarization, is less helpful, even if, especially if we're in a mixed setting, And it's not to say that we can't talk honestly about how we're feeling or the struggles we're having, but just to name in terms of mobilization and strategy, it may be less helpful. So I wanted to lift that up as something that was, I think, very helpful and something I've noticed a pattern of as well and have been trying to work on for myself.
Well, I'm glad that's something that you're already thinking about, and that it makes sense within the generational cohort. I'm on like the Generation X millennial borderline. I'm a Zennial, and like the whole Generation X cynicism and the millennial end times type of sensibility both really can kind of feed into that. And yeah, I mean the way totalitarianism works is more so than trying to scare you into submission and with terror. It's there. Well, that's part of it, but the why bother? It's pointless. Message is a key part of their takeover. It's the nothing matters is actually just as important as the fear. So what I'd like to do now is oh, Doug.
Yeah, just for some in a different generation. Hang on just a sec.
Uh-huh.
You know, one of the things that I have to look out for is working on issues that I worked on 40 years ago and had a temporary victory on around issues like voter rights that have been eroded, and the sort of frustration of going back over issues that you have engaged in once or twice before, and not letting the sense of futility get you so that you won't act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that word, the futility specifically. That's a thing that we really need to work to get past, and that's why that sense of agency is such a key thing, and giving people concrete steps. And another thing is, and this is why I wanted to begin the discussion with examples from Charlottesville and from Cincinnati, is as you're communicating with folks. Giving people proof points, pieces of evidence of times in the past that collective action has worked is so key toward getting people to do things in the present and the future. There is proof is in the pudding. It is more inspiring than any eloquent appeal to an abstract principle. Showing people that it can work tomorrow because it worked yesterday is the persuasion sweet spot. All right, so I'm going to put some prompts, some discussion prompts for a couple of breakout for some breakout rooms up, and Anna is gonna group us off into the rooms. So I'm going to put that up now. You know, we've covered a lot of different language patterns, a couple of different case studies, but the whole point that I really want to be able to do is to empower you to start thinking about, like, okay, what's going on locally? What's going on near me in my backyard, in my neighbor's yard, that is dangerous, that we should be on the lookout for, or that is already being a force toward peace, or a nonviolence that I can join into and contribute to. Want to make sure that we walk away from tonight with ideas for how to keep our own communities safe. So I'm going to put up some prompts here and for folks to discuss in groups. And I think I remember we said about 10 minutes for in our planning call. If that still works, that's great. I'm trying to This is like my first time doing Google Slides in a Zoom in a while, so thank y'all for bearing with me. So breakout questions. What are local examples that you're seeing of these violence dynamics or dangerous speech? Who are some stakeholders, local, nearby, you could work with to build resilience and prepare for rapid response? And if you're already doing that work, sharing some of that with the people in your group would actually be really helpful. And third, what are some risks with some things you would want your local community to hear in a time of high risk or of elevated risk of identity violence or after an incident? So what are local examples? Who are folks who are either working on it or who should be working on it and could be working on it? And what are some messages that you think would be really useful for your community to hear during an incident of this nature? Now, I want to add one challenge to this is I would really like for examples to be something other than a thing said by a guy whose name rhymes with Grump. I want to make sure that we're thinking beyond that one specific like bright siren of an example. And it could be other people in that movement, but I would really like to challenge folks to come up with examples other than that one specific person. So yeah, about 10 minutes, and then Anna will bring us back and we'll ask for a little bit of sharing out and then talk about some things we can carry forward. And I'm gonna go on mute and off camera during this time.
Amania, are you having trouble joining the breakout room?